America loves visible power. It remembers the man at the podium, the president at the desk, the general on the horse, the industrialist with his name on the skyline. It remembers the speech, the monument, the signature, the headline. But nations are not only built in public, they are also built in kitchens, offices, workshops, code rooms, rented apartments, crowded tenements, and quiet corners where the wrong person gets the credit and the right person disappears into the background. Across American history, some of the most important builders of the country were women whose labor was treated as support instead of authorship, as assistants instead of architecture. And yet without them, some of the America we recognize today would look very different. This is not a story about one forgotten heroine. It is a story about a pattern in which women carried institutions, movements, technologies, and public lives from behind the curtain, while history walked past them in search of more familiar names. Some helped build freedom, some built infrastructure, some built law, some built national security, and some did all of it without the guarantee that history would ever say thank you. So tonight, we step away from the usual stage lights and we look behind the scenes, at the unsung women who built America. We begin with a woman whose name should be spoken every time Frederick Douglass is mentioned, because before he became an icon, he was a man trying to get free, and one of the people who helped make that freedom possible was Anna Murray Douglass. Anna was born free around 1813 in Maryland, the daughter of parents who had been enslaved, and as a young woman she moved to Baltimore, and she worked and earned wages in a society that offered black women almost no room for independence. That detail matters more than it first appears. Because wages meant agency, savings meant options, and options meant that when history came calling, in the form of a young enslaved man named Frederick Bailey, Anna Murray had something precious to contribute. Not only belief, but material help. The National Park Service and Britannica both note that she played a critical role in helping Frederick escape slavery in 1838, supporting him before he was Frederick Douglass. Before the fame, before the speeches, before the books. Think about the courage in that. History often praises the person who escapes. It less often honors the person who risks helping the escape happen. Anna Murray was that person. She joined Frederick in New York after his successful escape, married him on September 15th, 1838, and then began a life that would demand not a single dramatic act of bravery, and decades of it. The Douglasses moved to Massachusetts, adopted the name Douglas, and started a family, while Frederick's public career expanded into one of the most important abolitionist voices in the country. And this is where Anna's importance becomes even greater. Frederick Douglass would become a lecturer, editor, writer, and statesman. He would travel, write, debate, and confront one of the most powerful systems of oppression in modern history. But public greatness does not remove private needs. Someone still had to hold together the household, raise the children, stabilize the home, and absorb the daily burdens that made sustained activism possible. The National Park Service explicitly notes that while Frederick traveled the country speaking out against slavery, Anna held the household together. Their home in Rochester also became part of anti-slavery activity, including support for fugitives on the Underground Railroad. That is not background work, that is nation-shaping work. Because abolition was not built only by speeches in public halls. It was built by homes that did not collapse under pressure, by women whose labor gave movements continuity, and by people whose names were not always printed in bold. Anna Murray Douglass was one of those people. She helped build not just a man, but a movement's endurance. And in doing so, she helped build a freer America than the one into which she was born. If Anna Murray Douglass helped build America by helping build freedom, Emily Warren Roebling helped build it in iron, stone, cable, and nerve. Today, millions know the Brooklyn Bridge. They know its outline, its towers, its suspension cables stretching across the East River, like a declaration that engineering itself can become poetry. But fewer know that Emily Warren Roebling was largely responsible for guiding construction of that bridge through the debilitating illness of its chief engineer, her husband, Washington Roebling. Britannica describes her as the person largely responsible for guiding the project during that crisis, after Washington had taken charge following the death of his father, John A. Roebling, the bridge's principal designer. Here again, America remembers the monument, but not always the woman who helped carry it into existence. The Brooklyn Bridge was no decorative civic project. It was one of the most ambitious engineering works of the 19th century, begun in 1869 and opened in 1883. During construction, Washington Roebling suffered severe health problems associated with caisson disease, and Emily became the crucial link between him and the engineers, contractors, and officials on site. Britannica notes that she acquired knowledge of higher mathematics, strength of materials, cable construction, and bridge engineering, so she could relay his instructions and represent his judgment. In other words, she did not simply assist. She learned the language of the structure. She learned the science. She learned the politics. She learned enough to become indispensable. And there is something deeply American about that story. A woman stepping into a role the culture did not expect her to occupy, mastering it because failure was not an option, and then watching history try to fold her contribution back into the name of a man. Emily Warren Roebling was not a ceremonial messenger. She was the human bridge behind the bridge. When the bridge finally opened in 1883, she was the first passenger to cross it in a carriage, a symbolic moment that said more than people often realize. It suggested that even if the age refused to call her an engineer in the formal sense, the project itself had already given its verdict. She had earned her place in the story. The bridge still stands not simply as a triumph of design, but as proof that a woman working behind the scenes can alter the visible face of a city. And cities matter, because cities shape commerce. Commerce shapes movement. Movement shapes national growth. So when we say Emily Warren Roebling helped build America, we are not speaking poetically. We mean it literally. Her work helped complete one of the country's most iconic infrastructural achievements, a structure that became both practical necessity and national symbol. She helped hold together steel, but also faith that the impossible could still be finished. If Anna Murray Douglas helped build moral courage, and Emily Warren Roebling helped build physical infrastructure, Frances Perkins helped build the architecture of modern American government. Now, Frances Perkins is not totally unknown. Her name survives in textbooks more often than some others on this list. But even so, many Americans still know the New Deal better than they know the woman who helped design some of its most enduring parts. The US on how 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 Department of Labor and Britannica both note that Perkins served as Secretary of Labor from 1933 to 1945 under Franklin D. Roosevelt, making her the first woman appointed to a U.S. cabinet post and one of the longest-serving members of Roosevelt's administration. That alone would make her historically significant. But titles are not the true measure of Frances Perkins. What matters is what she built. Perkins came out of reform work, shaped by labor conditions and social investigation. The Department of Labor notes that she was drawn into reform efforts after the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire and moved quickly during the Great Depression to help create and administer landmark legislation. The department's Hall of Honor specifically connects her to foundational measures such as Social Security, unemployment insurance, and wage and hour standards. Pause there. Social Security, unemployment insurance, labor protections. These are not footnotes. These are structural features of modern American life. They are part of the invisible framework millions rely on, without always thinking about where it came from or who fought to create it. In a period of mass unemployment and economic collapse, Frances Perkins was one of the people translating crisis into law. She did not build a bridge of stone and steel. She built a bridge between desperation and survival. And that is what makes her fit so perfectly in a story like this. Because much of the most powerful work in government happens before the speech, before the signing ceremony, before the cameras. It happens in drafting, negotiating, pressing, insisting, and carrying ideas through hostile institutions until they harden into policy. Frances Perkins understood that politics is not only performance, it is construction, and she was one of the great builders of the American social contract. There is also a harder truth. When Americans talk about presidents, they often speak as though presidents personally invent the errors attached to their names. Roosevelt's New Deal becomes Roosevelt's triumph. But administrations are ecosystems of influence, and some of the most consequential labor can be done by the people whose names do not headline the age. Frances Perkins was one of those people. She moved inside power without becoming swallowed by its vanity. She focused on working people, on the unemployed, on the vulnerable, and on building mechanisms that would outlive her. In that sense, she helped build a different kind of America. An America in which government had obligations. An America in which labor mattered. An America in which public policy could be used not just to manage crises, but to soften cruelty. That did not solve everything. It did not erase injustice, but it changed the structure of the nation. And Frances Perkins was one of the women who made that change real. Then there is Elizebeth Smith Friedman, one of the clearest examples in American history of a woman whose work was crucial, brilliant, and for years, hidden from the wider public. The National Women's History Museum calls her America's first female cryptanalyst, and the National Security Agency likewise describes her as a pioneer in US cryptology who achieved major successes in her own right, even though she was often overshadowed by references to her husband, William Friedman. She studied English at Hillsdale College, met William at Riverbank Laboratories in Illinois, and moved into cryptologic work that would eventually affect law enforcement, wartime intelligence, and national security. Now think about how invisible that kind of work is by nature. If you break codes successfully, the public may never know. If you stop threats quietly, there may be no parade. If your best work is classified, history itself can become a locked room. That was part of Elizebeth Smith Friedman's fate. The National Women's History Museum notes that declassified records later revealed more of her World War II contributions in South America, while the NSA credits her with major achievements in cryptology and highlights that she had many successes independent of her husband. Other public materials tied to her legacy also note her work against rum runners and spy networks. She was, in other words, helping secure America in ways most Americans could not even see. This is behind the scenes in its purest form, not the supporting actress standing off stage. The unseen mind in the code room, the analyst turning chaos into pattern, the woman whose pencil and paper could dismantle criminal operations and expose enemy networks. And again, the pattern returns. She is often introduced through relation, wife, partner, helper, before people arrive at the scale of her own accomplishments. But the record makes clear that Elizebeth Smith Friedman was a pioneer, not a side note. Her methods helped shape future generations of codebreaking, and her work mattered through pivotal moments of the 20th century. So what do these women have in common? At first glance, not much. Anna Murray Douglas lived in the world of slavery and abolition. Emily Warren Roebling stood inside the industrial age of bridges and cities. Frances Perkins shaped labor law and social welfare during the Great Depression. Elizebeth Smith Friedman worked in the hidden world of cryptology and intelligence. Different centuries, different tools, different battlefields, and yet the pattern is unmistakable. Each did work that made larger public achievement possible. Anna stabilized freedom's household. Emily stabilized an engineering miracle. Frances stabilized reform into law. Elizabeth stabilized national security through intellect and secrecy. Each occupied a space where the country depended on them, even if the culture did not fully celebrate them. Each had to become indispensable in systems that were not built to center women. and each reveals something uncomfortable about the way America remembers itself. This nation often depends on women, long before it properly acknowledges them. That matters because memory shapes values. If we only remember the visible man, we learn to worship visibility. If we only remember the speech, we ignore the labor. If we only remember the leader, we miss the infrastructure. And infrastructure is what keeps nations alive. Not only roads and bridges, but homes, laws, intelligence networks, but social systems. Not only charisma, competition, when out one to vibe, but continuity. The women in this story were builders of continuity. They made things hold. They made things last. And that kind of power, though less glamorous, may be the deepest kind there is. It also changes the way we think about the phrase "built America." To build America is not only to found a company or win a war, it is to make the country freer, more connected, more survivable, more functional, and more secure. By that standard, Anna Murray Douglas built America when she helped sustain abolition's human foundation. Emily Warren Roebling built America when she helped complete one of its defining bridges. Frances Perkins built America when she helped turn emergency into lasting labor protections and social insurance. Elizabeth Smith Friedman built America when she helped defend it in the hidden language of codes. And perhaps the most important thing they built was not a single object or law. Perhaps it was precedent. The precedent that women could master domains they were never meant to control. The precedent that intellect, discipline, and endurance could force institutions to change. The precedent that being underestimated is not the same thing as being powerless. That is a national legacy too. So why were they unsung for so long? Partly because the work itself was hidden. Partly because some of it was classified. Partly because some of it happened in domestic space, which history has too often treated as secondary. Partly because institutions led by men were happy to accept women's labor without surrendering equal recognition. And partly because America likes simple myths. One hero, one name, one face, but real history is more crowded than myth, more collaborative, more inconvenient. It contains the people who carried the weight while someone else got the statue. And once you begin to look for them, you see them everywhere. That is the real meaning of going behind the scenes. It is not just about recovering a few neglected biographies. It is about changing the camera angle. It is about asking better questions. Who held the family together while the public man changed the country? Who learned the mathematics when the engineer became ill? Who wrote the labor standards while the president delivered the speech? Who cracked the code while the victory remained classified? Those are American questions. And the answers, very often, are women. So remember Anna Murray Douglas. Remember that freedom movements require private courage as much as public thunder. Remember Emily Warren Roebling. Remember that skylines and cities are sometimes shaped by women. The era refused to call by their full title. Remember Frances Perkins. Remember that law does not appear by magic, and that behind some of the most enduring protections in American life stood a woman doing the hard, unglamorous labor of construction through government. Remember Elizabeth Smith Friedman. Remember that some of the people who guard a nation do it in silence, and history may take decades to unlock the truth. Because a country is not only what it says about itself, it is what it chooses to remember. And if America wants to understand how it was really built, it has to widen its memory. It has to look beyond the spotlight and into the machinery behind it. It has to honor not only the visible face of power, but the hidden hands that made power, progress, but survival possible. The unsung women who built America were never truly absent. They were there all along, in the home, on the construction site, inside the cabinet, in the code room, steady, brilliant, essential. History just took too long to look in their direction. And maybe that is the final lesson. The future is often built by people the present does not fully appreciate. Which means somewhere, even now, there are women doing the kind of work that will shape tomorrow while the world talks about someone else. That has happened before. It is happening still. And if we have learned anything from the women in this story, it is this. Never confuse being overlooked with being unimportant. Because behind the scenes, History is always being built,